Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to bring this individual members' debate and also for the support for this motion from Jocelyn Davis, who will conclude the debate, and from Nick Ramsey and Alan Roberts. The reason for bringing this motion before the Assembly is that it is my belief that, and that of many others, that we risk an epidemic of social and health consequences as a result of increased and relatively unfettered gambling, particularly in respect of the growth of fixed odds gaming and online gambling. At the outset, I must clarify that I am not opposed to gambling per se, and I, like many of my constituents, gamble occasionally. In fact, I was once the fortunate beneficiary of a Grand National £5 to win bet on Red Marauder, which came in at 35 to 1. And I sometimes buy a lottery ticket, despite the odds of my winning being 28 million to 1 against my winning. And like many other Assembly members, my constituencies also benefited from projects that have been supported by the National Lottery. This motion is not about any of these things. The motion is about the way in which gambling has changed and grown into a multi-billion-pound industry, and about the potential social and economic consequences of that growth and those changes, particularly on the young, whose exposure and access to gambling is now a key target for gambling advertising. It is my belief that gambling addiction is an increasing and largely inadequately recognised problem, one that is growing through intrusive advertising and the use of online technology. This motion is about the potential for gambling to wreck lives. It recognises how gambling has changed and proposes the development of a strategy by Welsh Government to tackle the consequences of those changes. One of the problems we face in understanding this issue is the relative lack of information and data around gambling addiction. The last gambling prevalence survey was carried out by the UK government in 2010 and has since been abolished, meaning that there is very little up-to-date data on what has happened over the past 5 years. The 2010 UK data indicates that 73% of all adults have gambled at some time, and of those, gambling was a significant problem for about 1 to 1.3%. That is around 350 to 450,000 persons in the UK, equating to probably around 20,000 people in Wales. And notably, the data also shows a higher rate of problem gambling amongst women in Wales compared to the rest of the UK. A 2009 survey by Ipsos Mori identified 2% of 12 to 15-year-olds, some 60,000 teenagers, as having significant gambling problems. And this would suggest around 3,000 12 to 15-year-olds in Wales. And I use all these figures rather cautiously because they are by now not only 5 years out of date, but much of the data is dependent on self-reporting surveys, so the methodologies are different and uncertain. But I think it is reasonable to assume that there is a significant gambling addiction problem out there, and it is growing, but that we do not know enough about the full extent of that problem. I think we can also reasonably assume that with the changes in technology and the constant bombardment of the population with gambling advertising, that the take-up of online gambling is rising, and is rising significantly. It is almost impossible to avoid it. Mobile phone text, internet adverts, TV adverts, newspaper adverts, betting shop window adverts, football ground adverts, and so on. Advertising is now unashamedly intrusive, giving 24/7 access across all age groups. Anyone with a computer, smartphone, iPad is vulnerable, irrespective of age, sex, race, or location. It should concern us all. As a result, habitual gambling is in danger of being normalised. According to a 2012 House of Commons Select Committee report on gambling, only around 20% of online gambling is actually based in the UK, but even that is still worth nearly £2 billion. And on this basis, the overall value of online gambling must be around £10 billion per annum, and is predicted by 2015 to 16 to have increased by about 34% on those figures. If this does not cause us concern, if it does not ring warning bells, then it certainly should, because the growth of fixed odds gaming machines in bookies should also concern us. Since the 2005 Gaming Act, betting office gaming machines have increased significantly, The maximum stakes are £100 for a potential £500 prize. It is possible to bet the £100 in 20 seconds. And amongst those engaged in support and counselling services, these machines are described as the crack cocaine of gambling. And of course, the industry is concerned about its reputation and is putting in place codes of conduct and looking at how to spot potential problem gamblers. But in my view, there is a lot more to do. Since the 2005 Gaming Act, the industry, through the Responsible Gambling Commission, raises voluntarily around £6 million for the purpose of education, counselling and research. In Wales, we've benefited from a 3-year, £180,000 per annum pilot focused in Newport, Cardiff and Swansea, organised via the Addiction Recovery Agency. However, this funding comes to an end at the end of this month, and this will mean that the only funding for support for early intervention and counselling in Wales is an allocation of £25,000. I believe that we are only glimpsing the tip of the gambling iceberg, and that in particular online gambling is poorly understood and may represent a growing social problem, increasingly affecting teenagers and young adults. A student advisor from the University of South Wales says this: "We have certainly seen a worrying growth in gambling. It feels that for an increasing number of students, gambling is highly addictive and impacting hugely on their personal lives, their ability to perform academically, and indeed ultimately to remain on course." So what can be done? There is clearly a need for more research. I'm also firmly of the view that we should explore how we might use our planning powers more proactively to better manage the proliferation and location of betting outlets. This Assembly should also have increased powers over the regulation of fixed odds betting machines. We need also to engage with the Gambling Commission to ensure that there is proper funding available for counselling and support services in Wales, and in particular we need an education strategy for the young. This is a particularly important point because we know so little about gambling today that we know even less about how trends will develop in the future. And one thing is clear: today's teenagers are exposed to gambling in ways none of us ever were. Saturation advertisements alongside televised sporting events means that we risk a future where, for the next generation, sport and gambling are intrinsically linked. Whereas sport once had the power to promote health, fitness and friendship, it may increasingly become a vehicle generating ever more bespoke gambling odds. And because the internet is now such a central part of our lives, it has the potential to normalise gambling in a way that the physical effort required to visit a bookmaker never did. And consider this: it is a very short step for a teenager who habitually games using a virtual currency to gambling with actual money. We know too that the internet can be addictive, so the question arises, is the combination of internet and gambling synergistically greater? We simply don't know, but my fear is that it is the fate of the next generation to find out. That is why, devolved or not, Wales needs to take gambling seriously. It needs to have a strategy in place that gives our people the best chance of having a life that isn't blighted by gambling addiction.
Nick Ramsey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm pleased to add my name to this cross-party motion today. Can I concur with Mick Antonyw's opening remarks that this is not a debate against gambling per se, but I think that there is a big problem here that needs to be addressed, and regulation is almost certainly part of the answer. Now, if you type the word